The darkness was absolute, heavy enough to press against the skin, tasting of oil, dirt, and the bitter iron of old blood. Sergeant Mara Vance moved through it like a phantom, boots finding silent purchase on the rubble-strewn floor of the ruined metro tunnel. Her hand brushed the crumbling wall, counting paces in her head, trusting the silent pulse of the sonar implant embedded behind her ear. To her, the darkness was not an enemy. It was an ally. It was home. Behind her, her squad fanned out. 5 figures wrapped in black armor that drank in what little ambient light seeped through the cracked earth above. They needed no words. Every breath, every twitch of finger was a conversation. They had drilled until their bodies spoke in ways language could never hope to. The invaders had made a critical mistake. They had come assuming the dark would terrify, that humans would falter without the sun or the stars to guide them. It had been true once, long ago, but in the years since the fall, humanity had learned to evolve faster than fear could catch them. They had unlearned light. They had grown sharp in the night. A faint vibration through the soles of her boots told Mara what her ears could not. Heavy, measured footsteps. Not human. The enemy patrol was near. She tapped her thumb twice against the hilt of her combat knife, and her squad froze, waiting. Mara remembered the first time she had seen them. Towering creatures of muscle and steel, faces hidden behind black masks with glassy, sightless eyes. They were engineered for terror, designed to dominate the battlefield by extinguishing all sources of light and watching their prey crumble. They hadn't counted on the stubbornness that ran thicker than blood in human veins. A glimmer of movement, a ripple in the stale air. Mara shifted her weight, crouching low behind the skeletal remains of an ancient maintenance cart. She felt the adrenaline surge through her veins, but welcomed it, shaped it into focus. The target group moved into the clearing, 12 feet tall, gleaming with plates of biometal that absorbed all sound. Their weapons were crude but effective. Serrated energy blades, massive impact guns that could shatter concrete with a single shot. She smiled under her mask. Bigger didn't mean better. Not in the dark. A quick series of taps against her thigh. The code for 3 targets, closest 110 meters. Instantly, 2 of her team peeled off to flank left. Mara exhaled slowly. In silence, they struck. The first invader barely had time to register the whisper of movement before a carbon steel blade pierced the soft membrane beneath its armored neck. It dropped without a sound, a mass of dead weight. The second whirled, sensing disturbance, but Mara was already there, her combat knife flashing once across the tendons of its leg, once across the throat. The third tried to roar, but Garrote looped around its throat, dragging it backward into shadow, where a pair of unseen arms folded it into death. 3 down. 0 alarms. The squad regrouped, moving like wraiths. They knew the pattern. Patrols never traveled alone. Another would be close behind. Mara motioned forward, deeper into the nest. As they moved, the oppressive blackness began to shift. A dull, sickly green glow emanated from ahead, painting the crumbling walls in ghastly hues. The invaders' camp, in the ruins of the underground city. They'd set up temporary strongholds, growing like tumors across what had once been human civilization. Their structures were crude, haphazard towers of scrap metal and living tissue, fused together with some biotechnological horror. Mara crouched behind a rusted support beam, surveying the scene. Dozens of them, moving with mechanical precision, harvesting something from the ground. The remains of the old city's power conduits, perhaps. Their hunger for energy had been their arrival's herald. Power grids flickering, blackouts sweeping across continents. Then the skies had turned black, and humanity had gone underground, into the very darkness they had once feared. "Targets confirmed," whispered Lieutenant Rourke, his voice a ghost through the bone conduction comms. "Do we call it in?" "No time," Mara whispered back. "We're taking the nest." There was no hesitation. The plan was simple. So confusion, isolate the stragglers, eliminate systematically. Noise was the enemy. One shout, one scream, and reinforcements would pour in like a flood. They needed to be shadows. Mara tapped her belt once, activating the charge. A second later, every sonar implant in her squad synchronized into a shared map, a skeletal outline of the nest and the moving forms within it. She marked targets with a blink, each icon flashing red in the squad's augmented vision. The assault began not with an explosion, but with the subtle, perfect destruction of light. Blackout grenades thumped softly across the encampment, devouring the green glow in a chemical fog. Panic rippled through the invaders. Their advantage, the control of vision, evaporated. Mara moved among them like a ghost of vengeance. Blade met flesh, armor met bone, and the darkness shuddered with silent violence. She struck a sentinel in the base of the skull, feeling the armor give under precise force, the body collapsing with a muted grunt. Rourke took down another with an elegant sweep of twin daggers, while Corporal Jean used a suppressed bolt gun to silently end 3 more before they could even process the attack. The invaders flailed, their technology useless, their instincts betrayed. One of them, larger than the others, managed to bellow a broken alarm cry. Mara pivoted, knife sliding free from her wrist sheath. It sailed in a clean arc through the air, lodging itself in the creature's throat before the second syllable could escape. Silence returned. In minutes, it was done. The ground was littered with the cooling bodies of the enemy. The nest was theirs. Mara stood amid the carnage, chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. Around her, her squad moved with disciplined efficiency, retrieving knives, reloading weapons, scanning for survivors. They found none. She knelt beside one of the fallen invaders, pulling aside the mask with a gloved hand. Beneath was a creature of twisted bone and sinew, eyes that saw nothing in light or dark, designed to be perfect hunters, but only against prey that couldn't adapt. "We're changing," Jean said quietly, standing over her shoulder. "Every day, faster than they are." "We have to," Mara replied. "It's the only way to win." Above them, a low rumble shook the earth. The nest destruction would not go unnoticed. Reinforcements would come. Bigger ones. Stronger. But it didn't matter. They melted back into the ruins, swallowed by the very darkness that once crippled them. They would strike again and again until the invaders learned the final lesson humanity had to teach. The night belonged to those willing to hunt within it. And in the heart of the abyss, it was no longer fear that lived in the human soul. It was fury sharpened to a blade. The cold seeped through Mara's suit as she pressed herself against the crumbling wall of the abandoned station. Above her, the ceiling had caved inward, allowing a sliver of ash-gray sky to bleed into the cavernous space. Snow fell in listless spirals, though here, beneath the earth, it was not snow made of ice, but of ash and bone. She waited, feeling the weight of silence settle onto her shoulders, heavier than the armor she wore. Movement stirred across the open square. 2 sentinels, gliding silently through the debris, scanning for signs of life. Their elongated heads twitched, sniffing at the air, hunting. Mara kept her breathing shallow, slowing her pulse. Beside her, Rourke crouched, his hand steady against the stock of his bolt rifle. Jean circled to the left, vanishing into the mist. The mission was clear. Intercept the Black Echo, a communications relay the invaders had deployed to coordinate their forces across the eastern seaboard. Without it, their patrols would fall into chaos, isolated and blind. But the Black Echo was buried deep inside a fortified cathedral of twisted steel and flesh, guarded by horrors that made the common sentinels seem almost merciful. Mara glanced at Rourke, and he gave the barest nod. They moved as one. Silent steps carried them across the broken earth, weaving through the wreckage, every heartbeat measured, every shadow used. In the distance, faint murmurs of static crackled through the comms, the Black Echo reaching out, binding the invaders together like a spider's web. Mara could feel it even without her implant active, a thrumming vibration in the soles of her feet. It called to them, an alien heartbeat pounding against the world. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Jin's signal. 3 fingers curled, 3 sentinels guarding the entrance ahead. A plan unfolded between them. Without a single word, Mara slid her knife from its sheath, the blade catching no light, blackened to perfect invisibility. She waited, counting the beats in her chest. 1, 2, 3. Jean moved first, a blur in the mist. He drew one sentinel's attention, leading it into a crumbled alcove. The creature followed without hesitation, instincts outweighing caution. In a breath, Jean had it down, his garrote flashing in the gloom. Rourke took the second, a clean bolt through the exposed vertebra at the base of its skull. Mara surged forward, closing the gap to the third. It turned, sensing her at the last possible moment, but she was already inside its guard. Her blade pierced upward beneath its jaw, severing its brainstem. The creature convulsed once, then sagged, lifeless. They dragged the bodies into the ruins, masking the evidence. Ahead, the cathedral loomed. It was a grotesque monument, half constructed from the remnants of human skyscrapers, half grown from the invaders' own biological machinery. Tendrils of living cable pulsed along its walls, and massive doors of bone and steel blocked the entrance. A single entry point. One way in, one way out. They would have to move fast. Mara touched a small device on her wrist, a pulse inhibitor, tuned to jam the Black Echo signals for a short window. They would have minutes, no more, before the system reset. Enough time if they were precise. They advanced into the mouth of the cathedral, weapons ready. The interior was worse than Mara had imagined. The walls pulsed with a sickly light, oozing fluids that steamed against the cold air. Organic nodes lined the passageways, blinking in erratic patterns. Somewhere deeper inside, the Black Echo pulsed, its song deafening now. The first enemy revealed itself as a mass of limbs and blades, slithering from the ceiling. Rourke fired, the bolt shredding its core before it could fully detach. A second creature, this one resembling a skinned wolf stitched with metal, lunged from the shadows. Jean met it midair, driving a serrated blade into its throat, twisting until the body fell twitching to the ground. They pressed onward. Every step closer to the Black Echo grew harder. The air thickened with pheromones designed to disorient, to induce fear. Mara could feel the edges of her vision blur, the whispered promises of death curling at the corners of her mind. But she gritted her teeth, pushed through it. Fear was an old companion. It could be tamed. At last, they reached the inner sanctum. The Black Echo towered before them, a monolith of alien design, humming with malevolent energy. Tendrils spread outward from its core, wrapping around shattered columns and skeletal remains of what had once been people. It pulsed like a living heart, black smoke coiling from its surface. Guarding it with a choir, Mara had heard stories but had never seen them with her own eyes. Towering, grotesque beings, draped in veils of living fabric that sang in frequencies meant to shatter human minds. Their bodies were thin, almost delicate, but their voices could kill. The pulse inhibitor would not stop them. Rourke's hand hovered over the detonator, hesitation flickering in his eyes. Mara laid her hand over his. Steady and sure. Stick to the plan, she whispered. He nodded. The moment they moved, the choir sang. The sound was unlike anything Mara had ever experienced. It wasn't noise, it was pressure, thought, memory, pain. Her body convulsed, muscles locking for a half-second too long. Blood trickled from her nose. Jean screamed short and sharp, but kept moving, hurling an incendiary grenade toward the nearest choir member. Flames bloomed, devouring one of the singers. The others howled, their song fracturing into discord. It gave Mara the opening she needed. She sprinted forward, every step an agony of resistance, and slammed the inhibitor against the base of the Black Echo. A shockwave rippled outward, severing the link. The cathedral trembled, the lights along the walls flickering to black. The choir faltered, their song dying mid-note. Rourke and Jean moved in, executing the stunned creatures with brutal efficiency. For a moment, there was silence. Real, true silence. The Black Echo cracked, its surface splitting along unseen seams. From within, a gush of black liquid poured forth, pooling around the base. Whatever core intelligence the invaders had built here was dying. Mara turned, signaling the retreat. Their job was done. They had no illusions about holding this ground. Reinforcements would come, waves upon waves. But the network was broken, at least here. It would take them time to rebuild. As they sprinted back through Cathedral's collapsing halls, Mara glanced once over her shoulder. In the ruin of the sanctum, the broken choir lay scattered like discarded puppets, the Black Echo bleeding its last into the dust. They emerged into the ash and smoke of the surface, lungs burning, hearts pounding. Around them, The ruined world stretched endlessly, a graveyard of cities and dreams. But for the first time in weeks, Mara felt the faintest ember of hope. They hadn't just survived the darkness. They had bent it to their will, shaped it into a weapon sharper than any blade. She pulled down her mask, tasting the acrid air, and allowed herself the barest ghost of a smile. Next target? Jean asked, voice rough but steady. Mara looked toward the distant horizon, where storm clouds gathered over the shattered skyline. West, she said. We take the heart next. Behind them, the Black Echo gave a final, shuddering groan, then fell silent. They moved into the twilight, shadows among shadows. The western front was a graveyard. Mara led the squad through a labyrinth of toppled skyscrapers and broken monorail lines, each step kicking up clouds of ash that clung to their armor like a second skin. The world here was quieter, heavier, as if the very earth itself had given up the fight and simply waited for the end. Yet somewhere beyond the ruins, a new kind of darkness festered, and they would tear it out root and stem. The heart was not a structure in the traditional sense. Intelligence reports, what little could be trusted, describe it as a living nexus, where the invaders gathered their wounded, their dead, and something else, something still growing. It pulsed beneath the shattered remains of what had once been Denver, now little more than a memory wrapped in smog and broken glass. Mara moved with a purpose, feeling the weight of every breath, every heartbeat. After the Black Echo's destruction, the enemy movements had become fractured, desperate. Patrols wandered aimlessly, disorganized and feral, but Mara knew better than to underestimate them. Desperation could breed deadlier things than strategy. Rourke took point, silent as a ghost, bolt gun cradled against his chest. Jean flanked left, eyes sharp, blades ready. And now, a fourth figure moved with them. Reyes, a scout pulled from another unit, his skin marked by the scars of a dozen close calls. He was quiet, professional, and still unfamiliar enough that Mara kept a wary eye on him. The heart beat faintly beneath their feet, a low thrumming that made teeth ache and bones vibrate. It wasn't sound, not really. It was a feeling, as if the earth itself had been hollowed out and replaced with something monstrous. They paused on the crest of a fallen sky bridge, surveying the battlefield. Below, the heart revealed itself, a vast pit of writhing tendrils and biomel structures, a grotesque landscape of half-formed creatures and machinery stitched together in endless, seething motion. Towering spires, each crowned with weeping sacks of fluid, rose from the pit like the spines of a dead god. Guards moved along the perimeter, not the standard sentinels this time, but something far worse. War forms built from fallen human bodies, repurposed and weaponized. Their faces still bore traces of humanity, twisted into rictus grins beneath bolted plates of armor. They carried heavy blasters, shock lances, their movements eerily precise. Mara felt her stomach knot. War forms were built for one purpose, to turn the memories of humanity against itself. "We can't take them head-on," Reyes muttered, voice barely audible through the comms. Mara nodded. "We won't." The plan came together quickly. Reyes would create a distraction along the northern ridge, drawing the war forms away. Jean and Rourke would infiltrate from the south, planting charges along the structural tendrils supporting the heart. Mara would move alone into the pit's center, planning the final payload. It was suicide on paper, but so was everything else they did. Reyes moved first, sprinting across the broken ground and lobbing a series of sonic disruptors into the northern defenses. The devices shrieked as they detonated, sending the war forms into a frenzied search. Mara watched as Reyes melted into the debris, a shadow among shadows. Rourke and Jean peeled off next, skirting the periphery with lethal precision. Mara remained alone atop the ridge for a heartbeat longer, steadying her breathing. She moved. The descent into the heart was like stepping into the body of some great, dying beast. Heat radiated from the ground, carrying the stink of blood, rot, and electricity. Tendrils flexed as she passed, as if sensing her intrusion. She ignored them, focusing on the objective burned into her mind. At the center of the pit, a great cyst pulsed rhythmically, veins of metal and flesh feeding into it from all directions. This was the heart's true form, the engine of the invaders' future plans. Mara could see figures entombed within its translucent walls. Human, alien, and unidentifiable hybrids, suspended in a state of perpetual mutation. She felt bile rise in her throat, but forced it down. There was no time for revulsion, only purpose. She retrieved the final charge from her pack, a core destabilizer, jury-rigged from stolen enemy tech. It would rip the heart apart from within, consuming it faster than the invaders could react. Mara sprinted the final distance, weaving through twitching cables and half-born horrors. She reached the base of the cyst and drove the destabilizer deep into its membrane. Instantly, the cyst shuddered, the pulsing lights within spasming in pain. The heart screamed, not with sound, but with something deeper, a psychic blast that hammered into her skull, flooding her mind with visions. She staggered, clutching her head as images poured into her consciousness. Cities burning, oceans boiling, humanity's extinction rendered in exquisite detail. She almost fell, but then she remembered why she was here. She remembered the faces of the fallen, the promises made to the dead. She remembered the dark, and how humanity had once cowered before it, and how they had learned to wield it instead. She forced herself upright, slamming her palm against the detonator. The heart convulsed, tearing itself apart from the inside. Flames and black liquid geysered upward, splashed in the walls, igniting the structures around her. Mara ran, legs burning, lungs screaming. Alarms howled through the pit as the war forms realized too late what was happening. She raced toward the southern escape route, trusting that Rourke and Jean had cleared the way. Explosions rippled along the tendrils, each blast severing another the heart supports. The ground quaked violently, sending Mara sprawling onto the jagged ground. She rolled, came up running, her mind a singular command: survive. A war form loomed ahead, shocklands crackling with deadly light. Mara ducked under its swing, driving her blade up through its chin and into its brain. It spasmed, collapsing into a twitching heap. She could see Jean up ahead, waving her forward through the crumbling ruins. Almost there. Behind her, the heart collapsing on itself with a roar like the end of the world. The pit imploded, swallowing itself whole, sending a shockwave that flattened the landscape. Mara threw herself into cover as the blast washed over her. Dust and debris filled the air, blotting out sight, sound, thought. When she opened her eyes, she was staring at the broken sky once more. Rourke was pulling her to her feet, his face grim but alive. Jean stood nearby, bloodied but grinning. Reyes was nowhere to be seen. They searched, calling out through the smoke, but there was no answer, only silence and the settling of ash. Mara knelt in the wreckage, feeling the absence like a knife in her chest. Reyes had bought them time, and the heart was destroyed. But the cost was another ghost added to the army she carried inside. "We have to move," Rourke said quietly. She nodded, swallowing the grief. There would be time to mourn later, if there ever was a later. They turned westward again, deeper into the ruin of the world, where the darkness waited with open arms. And Mara moved forward, blade in hand, a hunter baptized not in fear but in fire, because in the end, the invaders had been wrong about humanity. It wasn't the dark that humans feared. It was what the dark had taught them to become. The world bled around them. Ash rained from the sky like a funeral shroud as Mara, Rourke, and Jean pushed deeper into what remained of the western cities. Each step they took away from the ruined heart fell heavier, as though gravity itself had thickened with loss. Rhea's absence gnawed at them, but grief was a luxury none could afford now. Their objective had shifted. Intelligence reports intercepted before the Black Echo's collapse hinted at a final gathering point, a fortress, not built by human or invader hands, but grown from the remains of both. Here, the surviving leaders of the invasion plotted their last stand. Here, the war could be ended, or humanity could be broken forever. Mara barely slept as they made their way through the devastated zones. When she closed her eyes, she saw Reyes vanishing into rubble, the heart screaming its death throes, the countless faces entombed within it. Each nightmare hardened her, sharpening her resolve to a blade's edge. When they reached the fortress, it was worse than the reports had described. It rose from the earth like an ulcer, a tumor of steel and bone fused into a sprawl of impossible architecture. Towers bent at wrong angles. Walls throbbed with a pulse that echoed with the life force of every soul the invaders had stolen. Above it all, a single spire speared into the sky, wreathed in black mist. This was no simple command center. It was a crucible. They crouched on a ridge overlooking the beast, studying it. "They're consolidating," Rourke murmured, "pulling everything they have into one place." "Desperation," Jean said, "or confidence." Mara's fingers tightened around the hilt of her blade. "Either way, we break it." It would not be subtle. No room for careful infiltration this time. They had one chance. Cut the head from the body and let the rest collapse. Mara issued the plan quickly. Jean would handle demolition charges at the foundation. Rourke would clear the inner defenses. She would drive straight to the spire, where the command nexus waited. They moved at dusk, using the dying light as their cover. Creatures patrolled the outer walls. Hybrid monstrosities, stitched from the dead, armed with weapons that seemed to breathe. But the enemy had grown complacent behind their walls, certain their fortress was unassailable. They had forgotten what humans became when backed into corners. The first clash was brutal. Jean set the charges with swift precision, while Mara and Rourke carved a path through the guards. Blood and metal sang in the twilight, a grim symphony of survival. The creatures shrieked, their voices unnatural, but Mara did not slow. She was a blade now, nothing more. They reached the outer gates and breached them with a roar of fire and stone. Inside, the fortress unfolded like a nightmare. Corridors shifted, floors writhed underfoot. Lights pulsed like heartbeat monitors. Mara led the charge, her squad tied at her back. The deeper they went, the more resistance they met. War forms, choir remnants, new horrors stitched from the remains of the heart. Each fight drained them, nicked away at their strength, but none of them faltered. Survival was no longer the goal. Victory was. In a great central chamber, Mara and Rourke were forced to separate. Jean had gone silent minutes before. No time confirmed if he lived or died. Only forward. Mara plunged into the spire alone, the walls around her closing in, the mist thickening until it tasted like oil on her tongue. The structure seemed to resist her passage, flesh-like walls attempting to ensnare her boots, to pull her down. But she pressed on, carving her way through whatever rose against her. At the spire's summit, she found the architects. 3 beings stood in a triangle, their forms fluid, shifting between human shapes and something infinitely older, infinitely crueler. They were the minds behind the invasion, the ones who had seeded the Earth's fall. They turned as one to face her, eyes devoid of mercy or understanding. The largest one spoke without words, sending its thoughts knifing into Mara's skull. "Surrender. This world belongs to us now." Mara staggered, but did not fall. She wiped the blood from her lips and took another step forward. "We never belonged to anyone," she said aloud, her voice cutting through the haze. The first architect lunged, bladed limbs lashing toward her. Mara dodged left, feeling the strike whip past her cheek. She drove her knife into its side, where flesh met shifting armor, feeling the blade sink deep. The creature shrieked, a sound of pure rage and fear. The other 2 closed in. Mara fought without thought now, every movement a lesson in desperation. She ducked under a slashing claw, rolled across the wet floor, came up behind the second architect, and drove her second blade into its throat. It writhed, its body unraveling into mist and dust. Pain blossomed along her ribs. The third architect had struck her, sending her sprawling across the stone. Blackness clawed at the edges of her vision, but she forced herself up every breath of battle. The final architect towered over her, its body coalescing into something even more monstrous. It raised its hand, a spear of bone forming from its palm, ready to end her. Mara smiled, because she hadn't come alone. A blast tore through the side of the spire. Rourke, bloodied and battered, charged the smoke, bolt gun roaring. The architect staggered, its concentration broken. Mara moved. She drove both blades into its chest, burying them up to the hilt, feeling the creature shudder around her. The architect shrieked one final time before collapsing into dust. Silence fell. Mara sank to her knees, breathing hard, as Rourke pulled at her feet. Together they stood in the heart of the spire, surrounded by the ashes of their enemies. Outside, the fortress trembled as Jin's charges detonated. The ground split, walls crumbling inward. They ran. The fortress died around them, screaming its rage into the broken sky. They barely made it out, leaping clear as the entire structure folded in on itself, vanishing into a sinkhole of its own making. They lay in the dirt, gasping, staring up at a sky free of enemy constructs for the first time in years. Mara turned her head to Rourke. He was laughing, a broken, exhausted sound. She found herself smiling, too, against all odds. They had won. Not completely. The world was still broken, still bleeding, but the invaders had lost their heart, their mind, their will. Humanity would have time to rebuild, time to remember who they were before the darkness, and who they had become because of it. Mara rose slowly, surveying the shattered land. "We keep moving," she said. "We find others. We teach them." Rourke nodded. The night was falling again, deeper than ever. But this time it was different. This time they were the hunters. And in the darkness they had once feared, humanity had found its true strength. It was never the absence of light that made the dark terrifying. It was what the darkness revealed about themselves, and they were no longer afraid.